Good morning. Thanks, Mark, for asking me to come up here today. So anyways, my name is Tanya Pappas, and a little bit about me is that I have written over 80 and published 80 cozy mysteries, if you don't know what that is. Kind of think of Agatha Christie or Murder, She Wrote, things like that. And that's what I write. And I was not a writer, so it all started in 4th grade. So if anyone is over 50, well, you know, our report cards are kind of big back in the 70s. And so it all started when I was in 4th grade. And I always bring this when I talk about it. And so my parents are married, and they've been married for 54 years this year. So they were always in my life. They were always involved. And so this was interesting to me. It said, Tanya worked hard to improve her reading grade this 9 weeks. Her daily work was much better. She fell down at the end when she didn't turn in 2 of the 3 required book reports. I hated reading. I hated reading, I hated writing. So we'll fast forward, but I do always say, my mom, I do this speech quite a bit. I do go around the United States and speak at writing groups and reader groups about my testimony and how I found writing. So when my mom is generally always with me, and they're from Lexington, and that's where I'm actually from Nicholasville. So she does travel with me when we go. And I always say to her in the audience, Mom, where were you when I was doing homework? Because, you know, they're usually on me all the time. You fast forward, I went to the University of Kentucky. I graduated in an elementary education degree. I met a man from northern Kentucky at a wedding from a friend of mine in college. I got married, I had a baby, and I got divorced. And that was something that I never, ever thought would happen. I have 86 cousins. I was the first one to get divorced in my family. So that was difficult for me. And it was difficult for me because of my son. I didn't realize how hard it was going to be for him to go to his father's every other weekend on me. And to preface this, he's a great dad. And my son's in his 20s now, so that wasn't had anything to do with that. But I was the most talkative in my senior class. I got that superlative. I was the social chairman in my sorority. So when I say that I was depressed, it was something I didn't understand. It was something that wasn't in my DNA. It was something that I'd never seen. So my son would go to his father's on a Friday, and I would get in bed, and I would not get out of bed until Sunday morning, where I, at that time, went to Hebron Baptist Church. I've been at Crossroads for 10 years now. But I went to Hebron Baptist Church. I would crawl out of bed. I would go to church. I would come back and get in bed until he got home at 6 o'clock that night. And then everything was great until the every other weekend. It was so bad that my family started traveling up here from Lexington because they didn't understand what I was doing. They didn't understand who I was becoming. And my ex-husband's friends were my friends. But when we got divorced, all my friends left. So I had no one here. So I went to a Christian therapist and I said, I need medication. And she's like, no, you need a hobby. I said, no, I need medication. And she said, no, you need a hobby. So to make a long story short, I tried a lot of hobbies and did not work out. So I went back to her again one day and I said, I need medication. She said, no, you need to find your hobby. You don't need medication. And we would pray through it. So what did I know best? Go back to college. Sure, why not? I enjoyed college. So I went back to get a child therapist degree. And along the way, these were all God things for me, and I'll explain it as we go along. But I met a girl there who was my age. So she had said, oh, we got to know each other. She said, well, we have a book club. Why don't you come? And I'm like, and this time I'm in my 30s. And I said, I hate reading. And she said, oh, but there's wine and there's chocolate. And I'm like, well, what time did you say that book club? So, needless to say, I went to book club, but only for me to get out of my house because they scheduled it for every time my son was gone on the weekend for that month. I never picked up a book for about 6 months, but I went, and just to get out of the house, to start to feel normal. And I enjoyed it. They became my friends. 30s. And so finally, I went to the library for the first time as an adult in my 30s, and I picked up the book that they were reading. And that book sat on my bedside table for a few weeks before the next book club. And when my son was gone one of the weekends before the book club, I picked up that book as I was laying in bed. And it was a Sunday. And I picked it up and I looked at it. I got up, I got ready for church. I went to church. I came back, stripped off my Sunday dress, because that's what we wore with the church. I always wore a dress, I don't now. And stripped off the clothes, got back in bed, picked up the book. And I started reading it. So, just a few minutes later, the doorbell rings. And I'm like, so I go to the door and I open it. It's my son and his father. And it was 6 o'clock. And I had escaped into a book. And I couldn't believe it. The time just flew by. And I had not realized I had read that entire time. It was like 6 hours, 5.5 hours worth of reading. And I didn't realize it. But I had escaped into this woman's world. I had forgotten about my problems and how I felt about my son being gone. So, fast forward, I find another man. I got married, and we have 4 boys. And I'm still in book club. And this was back in 2001. And if any of you remember 2001, it was when Cincinnati had the social, the racial unrest and over the Rhine. So I was telling my book club members that night I was hosting it. So my husband, of course, he's like, well, which book here are you going to pick? Because I'd gone to the bookstore and bought like 10 books. Because I didn't know which one I was going to pick because I was hosting book club for the next month. And he keeps picking them up, and he's like, you could write this. You could write a story. And I laughed. I said, yeah, okay. I don't even like to write. I can barely get my therapy children's notes written. to put in their diagnoses and all that good stuff. And so he and the boys went away for book club. So I was telling my book club girls that I was really, really sad about the unrest in Over the Rhine. Only because I had a great aunt that lived in Over the Rhine, and she had owned an apartment building back in the 70s. And it still wasn't great in the 70s either, but she had an apartment building. And my stories of her and my memories of her are so fond. And the apartment building that she had huge windows, but you couldn't see the top of her piano. So when I would go to visit her, she'd put up the window a little bit just so people could hear her play as they were walking by. And she would play, and she was so animated, and they would stop, and they would clap, and she'd get up, and she would bow. And I'm sitting in the back on a couch laughing because it was a player piano. But no one knew that. And so my great Aunt Grace was a character. And there were so many wonderful stories. There's kind of a heartbreaking story, but it's still funny. There was a grocery store across the street in downtown where her apartment was, and there was a lady that would always go there with her poodle. She would hook the poodle up to the fire hydrant and go in for like an hour, and my Aunt Grace said that she flirted with the men. So my Aunt Grace got tired of that little poodle being chained up to the fire hydrant. So my Aunt Grace went and stole the poodle. She died of panic, and since she owned the building, it went on top of the roof to pee. So the lady never knew what happened to her dog. So, that sounds a little crazy, but she was a little crazy. There's a lot of things that Aunt Grace did. And those are just 2 of many stories that I told her about my Aunt Grace. So my group, my book club group, were like, oh my gosh, honey, that is so funny. You should put her words, her stories in a book. So that was 2 times, and within an hour and a half or 2 hours, that somebody had said, you could tell a story, you should put that in a book. So when they left at midnight, my husband was already in bed, as were the kids, and I woke him up and I said, do you think I could write a book? A book that would help one person escape what they're going through. I don't care if they've had a great day, I don't care if they've had a terrible day, just to escape, like it helped me, like books helped me. And he said, yeah, absolutely, put it in. So the next day, 2 of my kids were in Pee Wee football. And you can't leave Pee Wee football in case they get hurt. So what did I do? I have to say. So I went to Walgreens because I didn't have a laptop. And I think at the time, there weren't even like smartphones. I think they were Blackberries, right? So I got an ink pen and a spiral notebook, and I started writing my very first book under an oak tree in Ludlow, Kentucky, overlooking the Ohio River while my sons were at football practice for 2 hours. So that began to spark, I can do this. So I started taking writing classes. I joined a national writer group that had a local chapter. And lucky for me, which this never happens, and if it does, it's a very low percentage, the first book was picked up by a publisher for the very first time. I mean, this has been years. I've been one of this group. I've been honing my craft. I'm still a full-time therapist, a full-time mom with 4 kids, running a household. And I own my therapy business, so I was running a business as well. So at night, I would write, and I would say to God, I'll produce the quantity if you produce the quality. If I just had that one reader. Because I know, looking back on my report card, that along the way, everything that God gave me, every struggle that I needed to overcome was part of my purpose. And although it was heartbreaking, I didn't understand it, and I would pray, Lord, why am I going through this? Why me? What's going on? Show me the way. You lead, I will follow. Light the path, and I'm there. And so along the way, I just continued to trust. Why is he doing this? Why is this happening to me? So about 2 months before the book was to be published, the publisher and I cut ties, which is also unheard of. And so I was happy to be going. My husband said, oh, you ever heard of self-publishing? And I'm like, no, I don't know what that is. And he said, oh, well, that Sony e-reader that I have? Kindle wasn't even out yet. And I said, yeah. He goes, well, they have books on there, and some people have been publishing them. But I can figure it out. So, your book can still be published, and you can keep journeying and, trying to find a publisher, this, that, and the other. But, why don't we put it up on this Sony e-reader and see what happens? And I'm like, well, I've never heard of that. So, the more he showed it to me, the more I was interested. And I had gotten a cover artist, and I had done all the things that needed to happen. And I said, well, let me just talk to my writer group, which is part of this big national chapter. So they had a thing when we would go to our meetings called Cheers and Tears. And it was a basket, and it passed around, you could take a prize out of it, and sometimes it was a mug, sometimes it was a pen, something that writers like, we nerds like. And so I couldn't wait to get that basket, because there was a coffee mug in there that said, don't make me mad, I might kill you off in a book, and I wanted that so bad. And so I said, I've got 2 stories. I've got a tear and a cheer. So I said, my tear is at the publishing company, and I have split ways. So that book signing was happening, it's not going to happen. But, and they were like, oh no. And I'm talking, there's like 150 people in this group at this time. And I said, but I have a cheer, is that I'm going to self-publish this book. My husband's figured out Amazon is going to come out with this thing called the Kindle, and I think it's going to be really cool. And they're like, oh. So the president of the company, or of the chapter, came over and took the basket. And she said, you're not a real writer, and you are shaming us, and you cannot be in this group anymore. So I get on my BlackBerry in my car, and I said to my husband, push, publish. So the meeting was in Sims Township. That's where it was. So I drove the whole way back crying, saying, okay, God, what is this? I've been doing this for now like 3 or 4 years, at it every night till midnight. What happened? So the next day, that book had sold over 800 copies, which is also unheard of, which was a book about my Aunt Grace, so it's a fictional book. So I continued on, and I continued on, and so I found my niche in writing mystery, and I continued to self-publish, and I continued to teach other authors in my little own group of friends how to self-publish. And this, again, was not a thing. It was called vanity publishing at the time. But I was finding this niche. So one of my books sold a lot of money and made the USA Today bestseller, which is unheard of for a self-published author. And I was grateful for that. There were other things along the way that I had done. So I got a phone call from HarperCollins publisher, which is a huge publishing house. And they said, oh, who's your agent? I'm like, what? Well, like, who's your agent? We would like to talk to them about your books. I said, I don't have an agent. And they're like, well, we would like to make a deal with you about your self-published books. I'm the first self-published author. Any of, at the time, 5 big publishing houses, now there are 3, that ever picked up a self-published book and bought the entire series and published them. So I got to see God's handiwork. The reason why the publisher dumped me, because God was taking my books to help me read that one reader. And I felt that this was great and I loved it, but where was that one reader? That one reader that I was helping. Suddenly, HarperCollins opened up that door for me to reach readers. I did a lot of book signings here locally. They sent me all over the United States for a few years as well. And I finally got the one reader email and said, you helped me through my chemotherapy. You helped me laugh through it. My books are Southern. They're all set in Kentucky. And they said, you know, your books have helped me. You helped me when my mom was passing away. Or you helped me just get through a rough day when I came home from work. So I started getting these emails and I continued to move forward. I ended up now over 80-something published books. And God, again, every morning I write and I say to the Lord, I'll produce the quantity, you produce the quality, wherever this may go. So along the way, as the past few years have gone on, I'm no longer a therapist. The Lord has been able to help me put all 4 of my kids through college. Also, you know, they're now all in their 20s, and they're adults now, and I'm empty nest. But I still continue to write every day. And I still continue to be opening doors for other self-published authors. And meaning that is that last year, I was at a conference, and I get a call from this, I get all these Facebook messages from a guy that I'm thinking, oh, this is spam, you know, I'm not gonna answer him. And so he ended up reaching out through all my emails. I don't know how he found them. And then he kept saying, I wanted to talk to you about your movie rights, about your camper series, and your camper and crazy mystery series. And I'm like, oh, okay. Literally, he is a movie producer, and he did the movie like The Expendables. He does things on Netflix, and he also writes Hallmark movies. So I was the first series that Hallmark is inking a deal with as a self-published series for their movie and mystery channel. So that still is in the process. But if it doesn't happen, what is God telling me? And if it doesn't happen, that's fine. I'm not a movie producer, I'm not a screenwriter, I'm a writer. But it's people would say to me, oh, none of your self-published books can ever turn into movies or a series on TV or in the big screen, because it's only through agents. It's only through big-time publishers. So what God is working through me now is He is opening those doors for other self-published authors. He is using me, even if I don't ink a deal, that other self-published authors can get their books into other reader hands so they can escape through a depression, through an illness, through a parent's sickness, through a child. I get a lot of people saying, you know, my son is in jail for drugs. And at night, I'm worried, I'm sick to death over it, but I read one of your books and I feel better. I know that that's not my reality, but you're helping me escape my current situation for just a few minutes. And I know that God, although getting divorced was devastating, trying to raise a child on my own was devastating, going back to put myself through college to better myself, to provide a life for us was very difficult. You know, meeting a wonderful man who were still married and have beautiful children. You know, it wasn't easy along the way. They were boys, they wanted everything. But also losing, giving me the passion to write to help people escape, and losing a big publishing deal. You know, at the time I didn't understand. But now today, after millions of copies of my books have been sold and having amazing readers I'm very connected with, I host my own mystery event every fall. Where readers come, and I'm available to them, and I'm also available to them anytime they want to speak or talk about God. And God has opened up the door because I'm now, the organization that shunned me and kicked me out pay me to travel to their chapters to speak about how God has opened up the door for me to be a self-published author and to teach their authors how to self-publish. So God has really worked with me in doing that. And I love talking about my journey. I love talking about the Lord because literally, if you go back to my 4th grade report card, I didn't read, I didn't write, and it was something that I really loathed until I was in my 30s. And I know all of that was for my one purpose. And my one purpose in writing is fruit from God. And that purpose is to help one person escape through reading and get through anything that they can just for a little bit. And that is my God story. So.